Zoltán. Yeah, okay. Right.
Yes,
Okay.
good morning, everyone. I feel extremely honored and at the same time terribly challenged because the two previous speakers were so compelling and so interesting, and they covered so much ground that it is going to be very difficult for me to look relevant or interesting or sound as amazing as the James Bonds and other cool stuff that was up there. Moreover, I'm by no means an IT expert. I actually work in the government affairs space, which means that I am the Symantec man sitting in front of all those politicians who don't care, says Eugene Kaspersky, and all those officials who don't know what to do, and those who are scared and don't know how to defend themselves, and those who are thrilled by how they could attack, but they don't really know what will happen afterwards. So I'm in a bit of a tight spot also because I have to start by challenging the very title of the event itself, the Digital Fortress. Both of the previous speakers have hinted to this, but I don't think we're building digital fortresses anymore, or that we're defending fortresses with dragons and moats and that kind of stuff. Because what we're actually doing, if and when this...
You have the same thing, right?
Yeah.
Okay, last time we
Going
did
on, yeah. Okay.
It's okay.
So what we're actually talking about is not just a fort here, a castle there, and some fortifications here and there. It's the internet of absolutely everything. And I almost put the F word in that. We are talking about all systems going digital, all systems, legacy systems designed without any connectivity capability, being eventually connected to things which were never designed to be secure, connected to things which are notoriously vulnerable, and I'll talk about that. Of course, the most exciting in all of this is always the part of the iceberg that is underneath, but I think where we are actually starting from is way above the vision line, because there is so much wrong in the visible part already that we can't even start to discuss what's underneath, because people up there won't even understand what we're talking about. And this is kind of the situation I'm facing when talking to a number of policymakers who will tell me that critical infrastructure protection is about me being able to access Facebook on Sunday afternoon, because if it goes down, it's a massive problem for me. Sorry, that's not what critical infrastructure protection is about. That's not what cybersecurity, cyber defense is about. So I'm going to talk more about the vast range of issues that we're seeing in the upper level of the iceberg. And I'm going to try to make this really simple to remember, in the sense that basically, in our approach, we consider there is a model of a cyber cube which can describe the 6 elements to be aware of, the 5 steps in which a cyber attack can happen, the 4 phases of how you do cyber risk management, the 3 dimensions you need to address in your cyber defense, the 2 basic processes to implement, and ultimately the 1 goal you will achieve through all of that. So let's start with the cube model. This is from a colleague of mine who works at the Paris office, who's a great security strategist, and he came up with this. I'm using it courtesy of him. So basically, let's say that our cube has, when the cube moves, 6 faces. These are the first 3. We have the attackers, the targets, and the objectives of the attackers. Each of these can be subdivided into 3 categories. In the attackers, we have, of course, the hackers, the guys who do it for fun and leisure. I think there might be a few in this room. Then we have the cyber criminals who do it professionally and essentially for money. We are seeing a lot of those as well, and sometimes there is slight overlap between those categories. And of course, there are the cyber aggressors, or shall we call them... well, no, I won't call them any names, because they can be many things. They can be hacktivists, they can be terrorists, and most of all, they can be state-sponsored agents. Recruited among the other 2 categories, but that is just an accident, I would say. So we have 3 types of attackers, targeting three types of targets. Individuals, typically this will be the easier entry point into any system, the weak individual, the human component. I'll come back to it later. Then, of course, they are attacking enterprises for all sorts of purposes, espionage, for intellectual property, then pure theft, or other kind of espionage and intelligence collection, business intelligence about things like mergers and acquisition plans, credit arrangements, all that sort of thing. And of course, who's another target? Ever bigger, the public sector. For many reasons. Because first of all, we talk a lot about e-government all over the place, and we say that we need to bring all our governments into the cyberspace. But to a certain degree, they're all already in cyberspace because there is no government office, even local, without a computer with internet connectivity. The only thing is that they have brought in all the vulnerabilities and they're not actually using it for much good, in many ways. And then there are the motives of the attackers. Motive is often compromise or disruption, and it's going to be against infrastructure. All the examples we've seen in the previous presentations. Also, information. If we listen to what Mr. Snowden is telling us, then information is a bit of the crown jewel. And this has been so for 5,000 years, so I wonder why we are so amazed today that intelligence agencies collect intelligence. That's what they're paid for. And I'm also amazed to hear that people would expect intelligence agencies not to use a technology that is available for them to seize and to use. When has any intelligence agency in the world refused on ethical grounds to use any means it had to access information? It's just not how they work. This is not their purpose in life. If there's a way to get the information, they'll find it. This is absolutely the true story about James Bond. And then, of course, there is another subset of the information piece there, which is identities. Identities, as we heard from Tim, we have plenty of them, each of us. And identities increasingly command our access to both infrastructure and information, and it suffices to compromise an identity to gain access to all the other layers of the stack. So again, that is a very easy thing to penetrate in many cases, and a very powerful leverage in the hands of the attackers. So now let's look at the other side of the cube. We have on the other side the vulnerabilities, the impacts, and the consequences. This is the side that the organization who's defending needs to, let's say, build up their defenses on. In the vulnerability space, and all of these subdivide into three categories again. So in the vulnerability space, we have the notorious human vulnerability. Typical thing we do when we do penetration testing with customers. We drop USB sticks a bit here and there and see what happens. What happens is that most of these will end up plugged into machines, reporting back home to us. This, of course, is staged, and this is the purpose of the whole exercise, but people will plug things in just in case. They are told every year they click through the presentations and the trainings, you don't plug unknown devices into your laptops, and every year people do it all over again. Then, of course, we have the not sufficiently cautious employee who will take for granted that the email he or she has received is legit, and will, of course, double-click on the attachment because it looks so nice and it promises money or anything of that sort. Then we have these kinds of very reckless or just simply negligent people who put up their passwords in clear on TV footage. That's clever, isn't it? Or people who will actually fall for that kind of hack. Oh, look, there's been a big breach. Check if your card has been breached. Put in the number here, put in the security code there, put in the expiry date there, the name on the card here, the security code, the other security code here, and based on that, I will tell you, oh, good news for you, your card wasn't hacked. Guess what? Yes, it just got hacked. Then, of course, we have improperly implemented or even outright badly designed processes. This is a very interesting study we did in the United States, but there's no reason to believe that it's any better in Europe. Over 50% of employees who are discontinued in the company will leave with devices of the company and information from the company, including contact lists, including non-financial business information, and all sorts of data sets. And nothing is done about that. This is one of the biggest cases of data leakage, structural data leakage in the labor market. And nothing is really done about this because it's not perceived as a threat. Whereas everybody knows, every hiring manager knows that the reason why they're hiring a particular individual is because of what he knows. So of course he's going to bring away what he knows. Then, oh, I'm going the wrong way. I'm sorry. Yeah, processes. Oh, that's another one that was taken at a customer's. This is the shredder box with the key on it. Dispose your confidential information in it. Anybody can actually pick it up because somebody has thought that would be a good idea, very convenient, to leave the key on the shredder box. And then, of course, we have the technology vulnerabilities, which are ever increasing. Every year we put out stats of how many new vulnerabilities we've seen, how many 0 days in what sorts of technologies. And there is something that is actually quite terrible about these technological vulnerabilities. It is that for most of them, they're known. They have been known for ages, and they're still out there for a number of reasons. Sloppiness is one reason. Lack of policy enforcement is another. But I think these are not the worst cases. The worst cases are actually those that are hard-coded in our legislation. And I'll give an example right away. There is something, for example, called the legislation on medical devices. A medical device, to be used, to be marketed and to be actually used in hospitals, needs to undergo a certain series of certification processes. And as part of that, they also vet the software components of the medical device. So what's the problem? Well, the problem is that the certified status of the medical device depends on the absolute and total integrity of the product as compared to the state in which it was certified. Which means what? It does incorporate a vulnerability at the start. The vulnerability gets discovered, a patch gets developed, but it cannot be deployed for legal reasons. Because if I deploy the patch on the device, I will lose the certification. If I lose the certification, I cannot use the device in the hospital. So this is how we end up with pumps in hospitals mixing and pumping drugs into people's bodies, having vulnerabilities of 10 years old in their software, and they can't be patched because the hospital cannot afford to recertify the equipment. And this is hard-coded in legislation, and the legislation in Europe on medical devices is going through Parliament right now, and I'm not aware that this issue is going to be addressed for yet another generation of legislation. Forgive me if I'm wrong, but I have read the proposals and I haven't seen anything to that effect. Okay, moving on then to the next aspect, which is what it is that you're protecting, actually. You're protecting the confidentiality of your information. How well is this done in most companies? In that kind of way. You have nice Excel spreadsheets with everybody's passwords in there, and it is labeled passwords. Somebody gets in there, they just have to look. Or, this is how HR data, in one well-known consultant who's also dealing with cybersecurity, this is how they store their payroll information. Absolutely unencrypted, clear Excel spreadsheet. Then, of course, there's also the integrity of your networks and information that you're trying to protect. And this is what we have heard from the previous speakers. You're not protecting just the computer on the desk. You're not just protecting the phone in the pocket. What you're actually protecting is the integrity of all the underlying infrastructure, which at the end of the day will determine whether or not you will have electricity or water or gas or any of that. And you're also, of course, protecting availability, meaning the ability to access the information and the infrastructure and the identities whenever needed. And there, of course, the typical example that comes to mind of most is the overall not too serious, not too problematic DDoS attack we have heard about. But there are much bigger issues behind availability. Let's imagine, for example, that the engineer who has to run the emergency process in the power plant, when they have to authenticate to access to the control system, and they manage to memorize the 12-character password, including capital letters, special characters, numbers, and etc., they log in, but through lack of connectivity, the machine is actually unable to resolve the server where the public key infrastructure is hosted, and the authentication fails. There is no issue of confidentiality of information. There is no issue of integrity of information. There is an issue of connectivity and availability of the information, which has massive cascading effects in terms, for example, of not being able to avert an emergency situation. And then there is this new trend, well, relatively new trend, which is growing in proportions since last year. It's the ransomware and crypto ransomware, where basically your device gets hacked, some form of encryption is installed on it, and you are advised to pay a certain amount to the cybercriminal for them to restore the data. It's very embarrassing when it happens on your phone or on your computer. It can be terrible for your holiday pictures and that kind of stuff. But the reality is that these are, again, not the biggest problems. Because crypto ransomware is also hitting organizations, enterprises, public and private. And I have had one example in a large Western European member state, where the country's biggest public hospital got ransomware on some of their systems. And you know what their biggest problem was at that point? Their biggest problem at that point was that they had to pay 600,000 euros of ransom to a cyber criminal, and they couldn't run it through regular budgetary procedure. There were people who were not getting operations, there were people who were not getting treatment because of this, and the problem was, again, how do we pay 600,000 without a public tender? We do have a certain number of problems to solve before we actually address the cybersecurity problem. And this is where we come into the discussion on what it is that we're looking at in terms of consequences. Interestingly, the intangible aspect, things like reputation, things like image, brand, things like social relations, tend to be very strong motivations for people to up their cyber defenses, but always only once something terrible has happened. Financial loss is another powerful driver, because at one point, every chief operating or chief financial officer of organizations has to realize that, you know what, when the Symantec guy came in and told me that building up my protection would cost that much, I said it's too much. But now what I have to pay for remediation and damages and restoration of systems and all the financial loss incurred because of a successful cyber attack, it's tenfold that amount. So the financial implications of breaches can be tremendous, and probably you have seen that the Sony breach is leading into litigation and is leading into massive damages being paid to people whose data have been compromised. All this is only in the process of being understood, and all this is only in the process of making the case of why cybersecurity upfront would be a better option than praying and trusting that nothing bad will happen. And then at the most serious level of consequences, we have the concrete consequences. We have the generator blowing up. We have the uranium centrifuge going down. And we have all these very physical, material damages that can be caused simply through the use of cyber tools. So this is where we stop talking about just cybersecurity or cyber protection, and this is actual cyber defense. This is what this is really about, and not, as some have proposed, things like World of Warcraft or other online games. So now, probably none of you is new to how generally targeted attacks happen. They happen through 5 stages. Reconnaissance, which is sometimes imagined by many as something very covered, very difficult. It's not. You go on the internet, you find somebody on LinkedIn who's working in a company, You find their name, you go on Facebook, you find them, you go on Google, you profile them. Suddenly, in 5 minutes, you know who they are, where they live, what they're interested in, etc., etc. You have every information you need to send something that looks very appealing. For example, I very much like electric guitars, and if tomorrow you send me an email with a cool electric guitar, there are chances that I might click on it. Please don't. Then there is the incursion part. This is where you send me the guitar picture. I click on it. It looks cool. But what happens in the background, I have no idea. It installs a remote access tool. It installs a Trojan. It installs some form of access to my computer, which I'm not aware of. Then you get in. Once you're in, you basically, hang on, what do you do? From me, you will start exploring the network of the company. You will find out who my manager is, which networks I connect to. You will map out our infrastructure, find my confidential information, all of that. Flag for yourself everything that's of interest, and simply exfiltrate it. There is a range of security solutions to protect against that kind of workflow, if you will. But you know what's the difficult thing in this increasingly? Is that the bad stuff that is coming in, that is investigating my network, that is flagging what's important to me, and that is exporting it, tends to be very minute, very small, very tiny traffic in the overall traffic of the corporate network, because, frankly, you load a simple web page or you download videos or that kind of stuff, it's going to be megabytes and megabytes of data, whereas very effective stealthy malware is just a couple of kilobytes. So it's becoming increasingly difficult in cleverly built targeted attacks to actually find the tiny bit of malware that is actually the problem. And they are very good at disguising themselves as legitimate flows, legitimate processes, legitimate applications. So it becomes increasingly difficult to detect incidents, and it becomes increasingly difficult to do it in a lawful way for a number of reasons, chiefly because any information transiting through a network could qualify under European data protection law as personal data, and as soon as it does, there is a whole host of restrictions applied to what you can do with that data in terms of exporting it, processing it, investigating it, or even just storing it, collecting it. And this is something I'm going to talk about later today in one of the side sessions, so I'm not going to deal with it in more depth now. But basically, I think one of the biggest challenges of the cybersecurity space moving forward will be that there's going to be an increasing amount of traffic. All of it will be, let's say, well, necessary or legit or important for those using it. And in the midst of all of that, there's going to be a lot of malware that's going to be so tiny and so far apart that we won't actually be able to know exactly what is bad from what is good. This will challenge the whole way we do cybersecurity, and we in Symantec are currently reforming the whole way of how we do cybersecurity, moving from a number of, let's say, legacy solutions like signature-based detection to a whole new host of approaches, mainly hosted services. Because again, we're no longer defending a fort, we're no longer defending a perimeter, we're defending the entire realm. We're defending the entire empire. And even your own soldiers are not in the fort. They're out there, at sea, on the land, everywhere. And this is the kind of visibility you will need into not just the fortress, but the entire system. And I think that with that, my time is up, so I won't cover the second set of slides in this presentation. Thank you very much.
Right, okay. We really need to go to the break and so on, so people have time to split by the sessions and so find their badges if somebody hasn't taken one. But we have time for one question, if anybody goes. Okay, then you will have the chance to see Zoltán in one of the sessions, and you can